Hey guys, welcome back to World of Warships. Today we're taking a look at another new ship, this time a Tier 9 premium battleship that you can earn potentially for free over the next few updates. They're introducing a new set of missions and adventure, so with that comes a bunch of new tokens, of course, and supposedly if you get all these tokens, you can earn this ship for free, which is pretty cool. It is a Tier 9 battleship that looks a little bit like Iwami, I suppose. We even get some deep water torpedoes, which is pretty cool. But no secondaries here, it's a little bit slow and certainly does not have the best armor. But the guns are what we're here for. Some of the best guns at Tier 9. At least at longer ranges. That's the key here. This ship has the best long-range dispersion out of any Tier 9 battleship. Once we get over 20 kilometers or so, Tsurugi still has very good dispersion at those ranges. At close range, though, we have some of the worst dispersion out of all the Tier 9 battleships. It's a little bit rough at those closer ranges. This one's really designed to be that long-range sniper. You can still get decent salvos, but certainly not the best dispersion at these closer ranges relative to other battleships. It's still better dispersion, right? It's not like our dispersion values are worse at close range than they are at longer ranges. It's just that relative to the competition, it is better at those longer ranges. And the other thing I noticed was the insanely high pen on these AP shells in particular. It is so far and above any of the other Tier 9 battleships. It's kind of crazy. It kind of competes with the best of Tier 10 battleships even. It's very, very powerful. So that means you're good against battleships. Unfortunately, it means you're going to struggle against cruisers. It's a little bit funny in one of the dev blogs Wargaming made for this ship, the initial one. They talk about dealing with pesky cruisers. That's a direct quote, by the way. Pesky cruisers. And you tend to overpen them, is what I was finding. Unless we overmatch through an angled ship. Finally getting some citadels on this Los Andes. The pen is very nice for dealing with these battleships. But we don't actually have that much overmatch. Sure, into light cruisers, we will do very good things at any angle, because that's what overmatch allows. But with 406mm guns here, these are 8 406mm guns, we don't have the most overmatch. 30mm armored cruisers will be able to bounce these shells. And then if they go broadside, maybe they just take overpens, given the shell velocity as well as this extra pen. These AP shells don't have shorter fuses either, which helps us get through even into super battleships and punishing them at longer ranges. There's a main here, relatively close range, but we're going to get some nice salvos in on the other main at longer ranges and still have some pretty incredible alpha damage and pen on these things. It's really good into battleships. But the real weakness I found was against destroyers. Typically at closer ranges, you're going to be fighting against DDs. They're not likely to be spotted or to be very easy to hit at those longer ranges. So you really want to help out on those destroyer engagements when it's like 10 kilometers, 12 kilometers, or closer. And that's where this ship has some of its worst dispersion. So not only do we not have any hydro or anything like that to help us out, but we also have a little bit RNG dependent guns at closer ranges, especially on smaller targets like destroyers. So I found that to be a pretty massive weak point on this ship. If my destroyers happen to go down, the cruisers, our flank gets overrun, I suddenly am very vulnerable, and there's not a lot I can really do against those destroyers, which is to be expected, right? These typical rock, paper, scissors that is not very relevant anymore, but it does apply here. Destroyers really will counter you incredibly well. Now, you may have also noticed something else about this ship, and that's its turret angles. They are incredible. 25 degrees forward to get all 4 of our turrets, and in fact, we can get even 3 turrets at like an 18, 19 degree angle forward. Absolutely insane. And while we're kiting, it's still amazing. It's a 27 degree angle. So even though we don't have the best armor here on this ship, we're able to stay so angled, assuming we don't run into that 32mm overmatching battleships at these higher tiers, or a bunch of cruisers with 32mm HE pen. We can stay relatively angled, and we are quite tanky there. But there's a lot of ships that can get through 32 at these higher tiers, so still assume it's rather squishy. And just because we have improved long-range dispersion relative to other battleships, it doesn't mean every salvo is going to be pinpoint accurate. I would not call this a Slava type ship. That's not at least how I found it to be here. Even though it has some similar characteristics as far as the shell velocity, right? Having just over 10 seconds to 20 kilometers is really, really nice. Not every salvo was that pinpoint accuracy. Although that one certainly was. Into that midway there, we love to see that, catching out those enemy carriers at longer ranges. Our range is also very, very strong here. No spotter plane or anything like that, but having 23 kilometers of range is quite comfortable. Remember, it is a tier 9 after all. This isn't a tier 10 ship, so given that our shells feel like they hit hard into these well-armored ships and at longer ranges, it's easier to lead. It feels pretty good into these situations here. We don't have the best AA, but I'm sure you weren't expecting much there. So slowing down in front of carrier torp planes, probably not the best idea here. Subs are also going to be an issue. We do have plane-based ASWs, which is nice, but we're still very reliant on our teammates to help us out there. Destroyers as well as subs. It's going to be a bit of a problem. And into those cruisers, for the most part, I actually did do pretty solid damage. It's just at those closer ranges or really light cruiser broadsides, I found some more overpens. Now into a main at 17 kilometers. We're a tier 9 ship. Let's remember that. We're tier 9 here against this main. And that's a 36k salvo with a double citadel. Yeah, it's nice to have that extra pen. Very, very strong here for tier 9 on these guns. The weakness is going to be your survivability. So positionally, this ship will be hard to play. These guns into enemy battleships and longer range, heavily armored cruisers is where it's going to shine here. So 219,000 damage into a super ship game to start us off. It's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. I had some really good games in this ship. Although, while playing it, I noticed I lost most of my games. We get ourselves a win here, but in the next few clips that I'm going to show you, I lost a lot of these games, and I think it was down to that lack of engagement or ability to engage destroyers effectively. Even when I did end up shooting at them, the damage output was just so low, thanks to closer range dispersion looking a little wonky sometimes. What about a Brisbane inside 10 kilometers? And yes, we get a citadel, but there's a little taste for that dispersion. I think a lot of battleships would, well, you'd hope to do a little bit more than that to a broadside Brisbane, one of the least armored, highest, most vulnerable citadel broadsides in the entire game. And we get one citadel there, which is fine, right? Like, I don't want to complain too much about that kind of thing given the firepower at longer ranges, but it is a little bit disappointing when you let someone like that get away. Fortunately, our next salvo also gets a citadel, so that will finish him off. And now the torpedoes are coming in. I probably should have been maneuvering a little bit more in this one, but we will take a few torp hits here. But fortunately, we do have 37% torp protection, so they're gonna hurt, but not nearly as bad as it might on some other battleships that have much lower torp protection than that. We also need to notice the lack of heals here. That was something that I noticed with this ship. Even with Superintendent, or whatever they're calling that 4-point skill these days, we only get up to 4 heals. We don't have any other consumables either to buff, so a little bit weak there on our ability to tank over the long run. So everything really pointing to this ship wanting to play at mid-range, staying outside of its detection range, surprising ships broadsides. Sun Yat-sen there taking double citadels. It feels great to not be shattering on a lot of these broadsides. Outside of these Pan-American battleships, okay? It's really reinforcing again just how insane the angled citadel is. I don't think these ships would be that insane if they were actually vulnerable to their broadside, like you would think on these ships, as well as reducing that maneuverability back down to a normal level. Then I mean, they'd still be really strong, don't get me wrong, but if you could actually smash their broadside and have that as vulnerable as it should be, I think it'd be relatively interesting then. Much more skill-based to play, perhaps. Maybe not, considering the AI secondaries do a lot of the work. But that's a topic for another time. We'll see if Wargaming end up actually nerfing those ships in a few months. Yarsfeld here, broadside on, 12 kilometers. So probably not quite far enough away that we're going to guarantee citadels. It's a very light cruiser, but we do manage to get one, and that is a lot of damage after all. These are 406s, and they do actually have some decent alpha damage here as well. That's the other thing. We don't have to deal with a massively reduced alpha damage. 13,250 alpha damage. Something like a Montana has 13,500 alpha damage. So it's not like a Slava where our 406s do, what, 12,100? I'm just thinking of that off the top of my head. I could be wrong about that one, but massively reduced alpha damage there on something like a Slava with its 406s. So that's another nice element. Yarsfeld here now with his angled ship. Yes, we are going to do some very nice overmatch damage into him. But in this one, we will have to deal with a sub and a few destroyers. And that is the massive challenge when it comes to playing this ship. Again, anytime you got to deal with those torp threats or even gunboat DDs, to be honest with you, that new hull is going to be a nightmare for this ship to deal with. There's our overmatched Citadel. Poor guy. I mean, tier 8 light cruiser, it is always going to be difficult on a map like Mountain Range. This one is very, very hard to play. And I'm skipping over a lot here because there was just a lot of long-range farming of battleships in this one, trying to do damage into their broadside or angled ships. And we're on half HP or a little less, and now we're going to die very, very quickly thanks to Jaeger torpedoes. Perhaps unsurprising, but it is tough to deal with the Jaeger when you're on your own as a battleship player here. The Monty goes down, fortunately, so we're not caught in a crossfire here. As well as that Cossack going to farm us down and hopefully not get a fire once our damage control goes out. There's a chance, a very slim chance, we can get back to this heal. It is an 80-second cooldown base, so none of that fast heal cooldown to help us out here either, unfortunately. And there's the fire, so we will be going down. But a lot of damage again into this game. 195. I know I skipped through a lot of it, but it was very similar to those earlier clips, and we got some other ones to show you anyway. But just dying to torpedoes here. This ship, I don't see being that overpowered, to be honest with you. I think it's going to be pretty good into the long-range meta we currently have, just from this extra pen and shell velocity. But I don't see it being that overpowered of a battleship, to be honest with you. Montana here, 22 kilometers away, something that I wouldn't be looking for citadels on normally. Maybe in a Slava, maybe. Even then, I would just assume that my shells aren't going to pinpoint into his citadel. Yet here we get one. It's great, man, to have this long-range accuracy. It feels very good at range, not so good at close range. But I'm farming up a lot of damage, but I'm losing a lot of these games. And that's where we got to talk about the effective damage, right? The damage you do to a destroyer, while less when it comes to the absolute damage number you deal, it's much, much more impactful damage. And I think that's what we're seeing here. There we go. Another Citadel, 21 kilometers. Some consistency there. Wow. Into the battleships in particular. But the effective damage, right? The more damage you can deal to those destroyers early game, even mid game, it's going to help your destroyers survive because they're going to suddenly have a health advantage over the enemies. And that's going to really snowball to a lot of victories. And with Taihang here, I found myself trying every once in a while to help on those DD engagements and then just not do that much damage to them. Perhaps I'm too used to battleships with incredible close range accuracy, something like that. But you know, that was not the best dispersion into that Fletcher at closer ranges. Yet we do good damage at longer ranges. It's a bit of an odd ship to play. If you're interested in the longer range, more campy, pre-kited playstyle, which this game tends to be trending towards, it's going to fit in rather well. But if you do want to play it at closer ranges, try to impact those destroyer engagements, I think you're going to struggle. I think you're going to notice that's a major weak point. Even into an Iwami there at 13 kilometers, I would have hoped for a little bit more damage than that, perhaps, and into him there. Now, this is an arms race game, so we are getting some pretty massive buffs to our ship here, healing in particular, as well as a bit of reload in this one. So it's not totally representative of a normal game. Also, again, that third turret has insane firing angles. You're able to stay so angled. So in this game here, when we're fighting something like a GK, there's a Neptune, we don't have to worry quite as much about not being within their range, right? We don't have to worry about overmatch here. Yarsfeld sure has some 32 mil pen AG, but that ship, well, we can overmatch it, right? So he's going to struggle as well as his planes we got to worry about. But he's out of range, and pretty good accuracy into him there. When he's angled, that consistent damage can start to come through with this one, which is unfortunate. I'd rather have the consistent damage into broadsides. I'll admit I was quite disappointed after learning more about this ship and seeing that dealing with pesky cruisers line that Wargaming did in the dev blog there. I was hoping for some very low maybe not even overmatching shells at all, but something that gave us really consistent damage into broadside cruisers. Something about really, really short fuses, something like that with decent pen still. But that's not quite what we got. It still feels like a battleship. In fact, it feels like a battleship that has less consistency into broadside cruisers, in fact, than some of its counterparts even, thanks to its slightly worse close-range dispersion relative to those other battleships, and this immense pen and shell velocity. I haven't mentioned the torps much yet because I don't think you're going to be in torp range all that often. But these torpedoes are deep waters. This is a Pan-Asian ship, so we are getting those deep water torpedoes. 17,933 alpha damage. We get 4 of them per side. They don't have a particularly fast reload, but that's really not what we're using them for here. They won't hit destroyers, so just cruisers and battleships. I think you're probably going to be trying to use them as a last-ditch effort against ships pushing you around islands, something like that. In open water like this, we're probably going to die rather quickly if we're staying this close to enemy battleships and cruisers that we could possibly hit with them. The firing angles are pretty bad forwards, 50-degree forward firing angles on these torpedoes, but 30 degrees backwards on the right side of the ship and 20 degrees backwards on the left side of the ship. Very strange. At least that's what the Ship Tool website is saying. I didn't actually test that in-game, but now that I'm looking at it, that is crazy. Maybe that's wrong, actually. I don't know. That's wild if that's the actual case here. But the firing angles on these guns are really nice as well. So a bit of a weird ship. One that I don't think is going to be that overpowered, but will slot in nicely to this passive meta we find ourselves in here. Dealing with a Holland on our flank, very, very scary. So scary, in fact, that I'm willing to go this broadside onto a Neptune in smoke just to try and turn away and get behind these islands. Neptune accelerating, the dispersion looks good, and still only one Citadel. We nearly dev struck him, okay? And I know saying only one Citadel there, right? And that feels a little bad maybe as a cruiser player, but it's those salvos, man, that I'm looking for as a battleship player. Those are the ones that I want, much, much more so than the maybe angled salvos where I'm doing a lot through overmatch. Those are the ones that I'm really looking for, especially if we're looking at a ship that is dealing with those pesky cruisers. Such a funny line. Maybe I'm overdoing it on that, but that's just such a funny line to add in. Holland torpedoes getting us yet again. I knew they were coming, but it's tough to get away on this ship, man. It really is very difficult to get away from destroyers when you're caught in their range. 28 knot max speed is certainly not the best. 17-second rudder shift, also pretty bad here. GK pushing out potentially into our torpedoes, but they're a 10-kilometer range, let's remember. Some of the Japanese ships, like Iwami, for example, that ship with its torpedoes actually gets itself out to 20 kilometers of range. So even though they don't have the concealment and you're often going to dodge them, they're a little bit more useful as those zoning torps, where Taihang here, it's hard to stay in range with the torpedoes. But we did manage to land one, so I'm pretty happy with that, I suppose. And as for the build that I was running on this ship, it was a little bit greedy, as always. I'm often looking for that heavy AP build just to get a little bit more out of these shells, considering we're mostly shooting armor-piercing. HE isn't like that bad on this ship, but I'm always looking for those Citadels, of course, on these kinds of battleships with these type of guns, right? Really nice alpha damage there, and considering the shell velocity and pen, very, very nice. We only had a 19 pointer to go for here, so couldn't quite get myself another higher point skill, but that's okay. Going for 4 heals there. 3 is a little bit difficult to deal with. I do not want to be in situations where fire prevention might help me out. I think I'd die anyway if I'm so committed that I'm taking multiple fires and dying because of that. That's why I gave it up here. Once we have the full 21 pointer, maybe that would be a good option to go for. Although knowing me, I'd probably greed out something like Furious. That's not the right build, but it's the one I often go for, just purely out of greed. Heavy AP here helping us out rather nicely. Concealment-wise, 13-7, not bad, but not insane either, which is a good thing. By the way, I don't think we need a ton of really well-concealed battleships that outspot cruisers even. I don't think we need things like that. Turret traverse is a pain point as well on this ship. 43 seconds, even with grease the gears, so very, very slow. This 360-degree turret in the back will help you out. Feel a little less pain because of that turret traverse, but it still is something you don't really want to deal with, swapping your guns over all the time. And these turret angles are absolutely amazing. And they really need to be, thanks to this armor. 32 everywhere. And then your armor belt here is reasonable, but your citadel is also above water. This turtleback-ish, I mean, it's angled a bit, but nowhere near steep enough that we would actually benefit from this as turtleback. So above water citadel, got to worry about that quite a lot here. So be a little careful when you get caught broadside. Again, everything with this ship points towards really, really wanting to play at mid-range, not getting caught by the enemy team at closer ranges, as you're probably going to die in those instances. As for this camo, well, I mean, I don't talk about these all that often, but why are all the camos these days just like single color? Like what? I don't know what happened, man. I guess their reasoning is historical accuracy or something, but I don't quite get it, I suppose. And as for those torpedo angles, I did check them, and yes, they are in fact slightly better on the left side of our ship. I could not tell you why exactly that would be. In fact, given that the crane here to lift the non-existent spotter plane, actually now that I'm thinking about it, why is there a crane here for a non-existent spotter plane? Maybe it's for a different reason. I don't know the exact reason you would have something like this on a ship, but it seems a little odd. And that side that has that potential crane is the side with the better torp angles. Don't understand it, but that is okay. I'm just here to think about this ship from a gameplay perspective, and from a gameplay perspective, it's good at long range, it's good into this campy passive meta, and it'll do a little bit less good work at closer ranges, suffers against destroyers, certainly subs, as well as carriers. So this is the ship you can potentially get for free. It's a couple months, though, that this new adventure is going to be. You have to get, I think they said every token out of it, so we'll see how much of a time commitment that actually is to get this ship for free. Feels a little too good to be true, right? There's got to be a catch somewhere, and I'm assuming the time commitment is going to be pretty large if you want this one for free. But that remains to be seen. We'll see. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.